All right, how is everyone doing today? And welcome to my channel. This is a channel for educational purposes, and we try to clue you into a lot of great theories of everything, ancient and modern, primarily obscure, things that you probably wouldn't know about otherwise. And we look at cosmologies and grand unified theories, all-encompassing theories, magnum opuses, tour de forces, and earth-shattering discoveries. And today is our 214th video that we've done on the Reciprocal Church, which is something, a term that I coined, I guess, as far as I know. But it shouts out to Dewey B. Larson in his reciprocal system of theory. But this is a kind of a modern American pragmatic attempt to construct a religious system that we can use in our own lives based on things that we really can believe in. Things that not only are may not seem to be rational at the beginning, but once understood are rational. Things that you know are can be verified, and with evidence, preferably even with equations. And we've gone over things like ecstatic music and hardcore endurance training and entheogens and sacred geometry and mathematics and techniques for meditation to take you into exotic states. And we're trying to do this so that we can kind of replace the void that will be there once people start to realize that the Western religions have caved in and that they are about to collapse under their own weight because of they're not believable, they're not true, they're fraudulent, and obviously so. This refers to all three of the Western religions. But in particular, we're looking at the New Testament and Christianity. We'll be checking out the Old Testament in due time. We've said a few words about Islam as well. I think that the sources of Islam appear to be the same as the sources for the New Testament, except for they're the descendants, written by the descendants of the people who wrote the New Testament. From looking at the various literature, I've determined that the New Testament was written by the Romans, the Roman Caesars, and their immediate, immediate court in the late 1st century, the Flavian dynasty. And I certainly haven't come up with that originally. There are several other scholars that are pointing to that, especially, and all the way back through history. People have written about this topic, but in coded language, because you can't really come out with it. The first person to explicitly state it was Abelard Reuchlin in 1979 with his The True Authorship of the New Testament, where he pins it down on Arius Piso of the very powerful Piso family. He was kind of the emperor in the shadows, or the co-emperor in the shadows during the reigns of Vespasian and Titus, the two Flavian, the first two Flavian emperors from 69 until 81 AD. The third Flavian, Domitian, possibly banished Piso and so was against him. But anyway, they came up with Christianity in order to basically mellow out the Jews. It was wartime propaganda. The Romans had been fighting wars against the Jews for like over 100 years, off and on, but especially with this war of the Jews between 66 and 73 AD, which both Vespasian, Titus, and Arius Piso were all generals in that war. I know that Vespasian and Titus were both wounded in that war as well. And so this was kind of like an attempt to create a new Judaism, a new direction for the Jews. They were hoping that they could propose a Jewish hero who was believed in turning the other cheek and rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And, you know, by doing so, they would, you know, kind of dull the sharpness of the Jews in terms of just they wouldn't assimilate to the Romans. They wouldn't put their statues of Caesar in the temples. They wouldn't, in many cases, that's what the money changers were for. The money changers, they wouldn't allow even the image of Caesar on a coin into the temple. And so they had to exchange the Roman money for the Hebrew money that didn't have graven images on them before they came into the temple. And also the food requirements, the animal sacrifices, the circumcision rituals and other rituals, they were trying to get rid of all that. And you can see that written into the New Testament, especially in the epistles of Paul, which were not written by Piso, but by his stepbrother Pliny the Younger. And those were written in a later period, not an earlier period, according to me. Now we're reading the work here of Michael Menescot's, his Christianity's Origins, the Flavian secrecy cult, and he pins it down by looking at the book of Luke in particular and Josephus's Wars of the Jews, which was a history written in the Roman court according to Josephus. So something that you can't really take seriously as history, which most Christians have, because they claim that Josephus corroborates the existence of Jesus. He's the only first century author to do so. But if you look closely, the evidence actually cuts the other way. If you go into Josephus just a little bit, you fall into a rabbit hole of, oh boy, Josephus actually not only cannot be taken seriously as a true source, but also clearly wrote the Gospels as well as this Wars of the Jews book. So whoever Josephus is the author of the New Testament. As you can see, hundreds and hundreds of parallels between the two. And the ancient people noticed that many sects had Josephus' Wars of the Jews as, or also known as Jewish War, as part of their Bible. And the preterist sect still does have Josephus as part of the Bible. But the problem is the parallels or parables between, or paradoxes between the Wars of the Jews and the Gospels are that Jesus predicts something is going to happen, or prophesies something that's going to happen parabolically or metaphorically, symbolically, and it's fulfilled literally by Titus, usually exactly 40 years later on the calendar. So that basically means that Titus is the second coming of Jesus. So that kind of turns into a kind of a double bind. And so a lot of the Christians got rid of that idea that they should be having Josephus as part of their Bible, but they still use his name to verify or corroborate the existence of Jesus, where otherwise there is none. The New Testament is the only source that refers to Jesus in the first century, other than this Josephus. Now, Michael Menescot's here in his Christian Origins book, is Christianity's Origins book. We're in the introduction, and he was just talking about this with Josephus, now Josephus, according to Reuchlin, is Arius Piso. That was a pseudonym, pen name of Piso's, was Josephus. And so he wrote the autobiography of Josephus as well as his book Jewish Antiquities, with a lot of help from his some of his relatives or his in-laws who were from the Herodian dynasty. They were Herods. And the Herods he traces back to the Hasmoneans or the Maccabees. So they gave him a lot of the Jewish lore that he needed to be able to have the expertise to write this stuff. But he also organized what he what's known as the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament. And so he had Jewish scholars translate the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek. The New Testament, of course, is written in Greek, which is a red flag right off the bat. Why the hell would the New Testament be written in Greek if it were written by an authentic source in Palestine? It would have been written in Hebrew or Aramaic. And Jesus probably spoke in Aramaic, and so you're already reading it in Greek, and so it's already in translation. You've already, right before you even started, and then you're reading it in English, you know. So if you think that you're getting something authentic here, you know, you're gullible. So now he's talking about the theory that Josephus, his allusions to Jesus were actually added later by Christian scholars like the church fathers, like Origen or I think Saint Ignatius or somebody like that they added it to confirm Christianity. But he is. I would dispute that. He would dispute that, because it seems like that the paragraph, which is called the Testimonium, that refers to Jesus in passing, is sandwiched between two other paragraphs that have nothing to do with that. But if you look at the work of Joseph Atwills and his Caesar's Messiah, he shows that those three paragraphs are in there on purpose for a very specific reason, which I think he's going to get to here. So we'll start right from here. The best evidence for that theory is that these references to Jesus' story seem abruptly inserted into otherwise flowing text, whilst later Christian apologists who knew of Josephus' works didn't mention his references to Jesus, when it would seem to be in their interest to do so. In this book, I will show that the original author had a need to insert references to Jesus' story in specific places which didn't fit the wider narrative, and that later Christian apologists would have wanted to avoid anyone noticing them for reasons that will become clear. In any case, the notion of a dozen or so additions referencing Jesus' story in the Jewish War was shattered by Joseph Atwill's book, Caesar's Messiah. Atwill demonstrated the existence of a coherent sequence of metaphorical parallels between the two stories, in which Jesus' story appears to covertly parody Titus in the Jewish War. Unlike the supposed additions, these much more subtle parallels are integral to the narrative of the Jewish War, and nobody doubts that this text is original. Yet it turns out that parallels Atwill discovered were just the beginning. So Atwill discovered, well, first of all, Roman Piso and Reuchlin, I think they discovered about 40 or so parallels between the Old and New Testament. I mean, between the New Testament and Josephus's Wars of the Jews. And Atwill discovered maybe 50 more. Menescot's discovers hundreds more. And so we'll be going over those as we go over this book. And eventually we're going to go through the book of Luke and plot the points the same way that Menescot's does. He plots all the points. This is the vertical axis is the book of Luke, 1, 2, 3, 4, chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 24. And on this axis, horizontal axis, is Wars of the Jews by paragraph. And there are about 700 paragraphs. And if you plot all the points where there are parallels, it spells out the name. They sign their name to it. Arius Piso Titus Vespasianus, APTVS. Titus Vespasianus is actually imprinted on many Roman coins from this time period. And so that is not, it's not like you're making it up. They actually did use the TVS part. Now, you can think of it in a little bit more of a complex way, that because Wars of the Jews is supposed to be about the Jewish War from 66 to 73, but it actually starts way back at 200 BC or something like that. And the first Wars of the Jews is in 7 books. And the first 2 books get you up into the 1st century. And so it could be that the TVS part, Titus Vespasianus, was written first. And then the AP Arius Piso came along and wrote the 2nd book and the 1st book actually after the bulk of it, and then changed all the headings. So that's something that is that Menescot tosses around as well. Okay, extraordinary evidence that Luke originates from the Flavian Roman government. In this book, I will show that the core stories within the Gospel of Luke and Jewish War both contain very carefully hidden yet extraordinarily detailed parodies of each other, meaning that they had to have been written in unison at the same time by the same people communicating with each other at the very least. This is important because making 2 stories intimately parody each other is only possible by writing them together as a single literary project. If one story had been written later or independently, then it inevitably wouldn't be parodied by the other one. So to make 2 stories intimately parody each other's core narratives requires editorial control over both. And the logical consequence of that is that the story in Luke has the same origin as the story in Jewish War, which is quite undeniably the Flavian Roman government of the AD 70s, of the CE 70s. If that were not enough evidence to convince the reader, these parallels are arranged so that when their locations are plotted, they form lines which spell out 5 Latin letters, which I will show later to be a meaningful message consistent with a Flavian government origin. And that main chart is on the thumbnail. Charts were uncommon in the 1st century, having been known for only 200 years. But if you wanted to hide a message, it would make sense to use an uncommon technique. And I believe, I think Pliny actually referred to plotting points in 2 dimensions. So he knew about it. Even though it had only been developed 200 years earlier, he knew about it. Incidentally, I've been blown away today because I was reading an article by Roman Piso on some of the aliases that he says that Arius Piso used, and he says that one of them was Heron of Alexandria, and this dude was like an inventor back, which Piso, I think that's clearly like within his ken, and he was a master of like hydraulics or pneumatics, and so he would use air to do things. And he said that when they set up the Christian church, they worked it out like crazy. They would, first of all, they would, the Gospels were written as plays. They wrote themselves into the Gospels. And so Piso would play the role of Jesus. He also played the role of Joseph. Pliny played the role of Paul. Piso's kids played the role of the apostles. And they kind of roamed around in the Roman Empire at various places in front of slaves and Gentiles, and also originally Jews, but then slaves and Gentiles later. And they performed these plays. And but as it didn't really catch on that much, but to whatever extent they got traction, they tried to start building churches in locations about 100 AD, in locations where there had been pagan altars originally. And they built these churches, and they would be tricked out in order to like deceive the masses, because the masses had no idea of science or anything. And so they had like coin operated, like you put the coin in and then the curtain opens up, or they had it set up so that the curtain opened up on the stage, or they just had everything rigged up so it looked like God did it, but they controlled it all. And so it's no wonder, it's actually crazy that it flopped, that it didn't really, according to Roman Piso, it pretty much totally flopped after Arius Piso died. And then the church only existed pretty much on paper for about 200 years until Constantine came around. But just looking at this guy's pneumatics, his like sketches and stuff like that are amazing, because he shows like 78 different inventions and basically tells you what they're for, and they're all for like tricking the audience. They're all used in the church, just about all of them. I think there's a couple of them to like put out fires and stuff like that, using, being able to get a lot of pressure in water and stuff like that. But most of them are used, for the church. They had like water organs, and they had these coin operated, I don't know if it was coin operated confession or what it was, but anyway, we'll learn more about that as we get further into it. I'm still just in the introduction of that book. It's called like the Pneumatics of Heron of Alexandria. Okay. As with the presence of the two mutual parodies, the purpose of arranging them to form a message appears to have the purpose of enabling the original author to prove that they created Jesus' story. By arranging them purposefully, this shows that they cannot be coincidence, which helps rule out any scenario other than that the two documents were created as a single literary project. Okay, I'm attempting to find the new page, and hopefully it's the right page or the correct page. Well, if it had a number on it, then I would be able to tell you. I don't see the number, however. Yeah, I think this is right. Okay. Let me make sure. I had to photograph the book because it is, yeah, okay. Because this book's not online, and the print is impossibly small to read. I don't, haven't been reading too much, but so far I've read like half a page. Could these parallels be a series of coincidences that just happen to be arranged to form these Latin letters when plotted? I'll come back to what the APTVS pattern means. But I want to focus here on whether it would be a coincidental pattern. The level of detail in the pattern immediately suggests that this cannot be the case. But for the skeptical reader, I will demonstrate that it is impossible. To do this, I will first show that there is one particular thematically coherent group of parallels for which there is no room for argument. No risk of subjectivity involved in identifying them. These involve both stories containing short sections of text, each alluding to the required steps of the Passover ritual, as described in Exodus 12 of the Christian Old Testament. These parallels are shown on the chart below in red. So with that APTVS pattern, the red dots are really just up in the top of Matthew 20, 21, 22, 23, and then over in the paragraphs about 600 of the Jewish War. There's only, 10, 15 dots over there. And he says the caption is just the pattern that emerges when noteworthy parallels are plotted. Here are two examples of this sequence of parallels. In Luke, at Passover, the soldiers actively decide against breaking the bones of Jesus. He has in parentheses, the Lamb of God, which mirrors the requirement of the Passover ritual in Exodus 12, that you must not break the bones of the Passover sacrificial lamb when cooking it, which in poor families was performed on a skewer or spit. In Jewish war, we find the matching event also occurs during the Passover sacrifice, where a series of violent events occur during the Passover sacrifice, including one man getting skewered. But none of these violent acts involve breaking bones. In Jewish war, when Mary kills her baby as a sacrifice at Passover and eats him, the text indicates that her baby is descended from the house of hyssop. Therefore, hyssop is in the baby's bloodline, which mirrors the requirements of Passover ritual in Exodus 12 of putting hyssop in the Passover sacrifice's blood. In Luke, we find the matching event occurring when Jesus is presented with hyssop soaked in wine, a Christian metaphor for blood, as he dies on the cross. My point is that these are unambiguous. For each of the steps that Jews must perform during the Passover ritual set out in Exodus 12, there is one or two locations in Luke that evokes it, and one or two locations in the story of the Jerusalem famine at Passover in Wars of the Jews that evokes it. I will then show that this group parallels are all arranged in a manner that aligns with the APTVS pattern. All 40 of them align with the pattern, including the 21 most unambiguous parallels. See, those parallels that he says that are unambiguous, I think they are right. I think they are correct, but I don't think that they're unambiguous. I think that there is a little bit of ambiguity there. Maybe not much, but I mean, there's certainly, the parallels are there if you're looking for them, but still you could conceivably read over those and kind of not notice it, especially, well, obviously if you haven't read Exodus 12, but you know, there are way more solid parallels than that. I'll just say that. But anyway, all of them fit the pattern. They all fit into the general pattern, which I don't find that convincing because, I don't know, they're all kind of in the same location. So it's like if one of them fits the pattern, most of them are. And there's just a big cluster of dots over there. So anyway, the 21 most unambiguous parallels, if these 21 had occurred as coincidences, there is only a 1 in 4 chance for each one to align with the APTVS pattern, which comes with odds of 1 in 4 trillion. He's not very good at math, clearly, because he says 1 in 4 million, and then he says, therefore, 1 in 4 to the 21. A million is 4 to the 12th. So he's thinking of something else, where he says 1 in 4 to the 21. He would need 9 more zeros there. Anyway, I'm not sure which he, so I guess that's 1 in 4 to the, oh, I see. 1 in 4 to the 21st power. Okay, I got it. Sorry, my fault. So 1 in 4, but basically that's 1 in 4 trillion. That would be 10 to the 12th. 4 to the 21st is apparently 10 to the 12th, which makes sense. There are other ways to demonstrate that the APTVS pattern is genuine, but this is one of the simplest. Okay, we'll leave it there.